The apartment door was open a crack when I pushed it with my shoulder. The hallway light slanted across the floor and cut the bedroom in half. Suspicion landed in my mouth like a dry coin. Mason's jacket was missing from the peg, his scent of cedar and coffee gone from the pillow, and a single folded note lay on the nightstand where his watch usually sat.
It's the only way.
I picked up the note with shaking fingers.
I can't.
The paper had 3 lines in Mason's handwriting and no explanation about leaving. Suspicion drove me out of bed faster than grief did. I needed to see what had changed and why. I moved through the room as if I could find him among the small evidence he left behind. The worn brown leather notebook he kept by the lamp was closed. His stainless watch was not on the dresser. I pressed my palm to the mattress on his side and felt only the outline where he had slept the night before. The emptiness was a simple fact I could test with touch. I shoved my hand under the pillow and produced a thumbtack stuck into a torn corner of a photograph of us at the pier. My pulse sped. The thumbtack hadn't been there 2 nights ago. I went downstairs and met Lena in the stairwell before I reached the street. Lena's fingers were red from the cooler air. She held my gaze more tightly than she usually did. "Ava," she said, "I saw Mason leave. He was with a woman, and he looked rushed." Her voice was small against the concrete steps. "He got into a taxi at 9:30. Lena's certainty landed like a second coin on top of the first. Suspicion turned toward betrayal, and my hands tightened on the stair rail. "Mason, where is he now?" I asked. The word left me brittle. "I don't know. Lena, I thought you should know. He didn't look like himself." She pulled her scarf higher and watched my face. Her mention of someone else pushed me from confusion into a new question. Did Mason leave because of danger, or because he had chosen someone else? I came back to the apartment and opened Mason's closet with a fresh urgency. Clothes were arranged the way he left them, jackets on the right, shirts folded unevenly. Under a stack of shirts I found a ticket stub folded flat and a hotel keycard with a smudge of ink. I said the word out loud. Hotel. The room contracted around me. Evidence shifted the scene from guesswork to a trail. I felt suspicion fracture into a sharper mix. Anger at being excluded and fear at what I did not know. I called No at the office before I let the worry settle into my bones. No answered on the second ring. "Ava," he said. His voice was careful. "Mason's been off the grid today. He gave me a keycard to his locker this morning and told me not to go through it unless something happened." I heard the hesitation. He looked distracted. No's avoidance was a detail that pushed me to act. At the office that morning, the open plan floor smelled of stale coffee and toner. No slid a keycard across the meeting room table without looking at me. He kept his sleeves rolled and his fingers tapped the table while he spoke. "Ava, I didn't want to pry. Mason's been late. He's been leaving early, and yesterday someone left an envelope at his desk. He didn't open it in front of me." No's words were sparse. I asked him to come with me to his locker. We walked through the storage corridor. The fluorescent lights hummed. When No swiped the card, the locker clicked open to reveal a small voice recorder and a folded page with a printed threat stapled to it. I snapped the recorder into my palm. Mason's voice came out of it rough and low. "If anything happens to me, tell her I tried to keep her safe." Hearing him say my name made my stomach drop. For a moment I only held the device and listened to the breathing between his sentences. The recorded warning moved my suspicion into fear. Who would threaten him? I asked No. No shrugged. "I don't know. He thought someone had been following him. Mason didn't tell me everything." He met my eyes. "Take the recorder. Find him." No's words were not a command but an invitation to the same worry. I followed the trail Mason had left like a map of small choices. The hotel address on the ticket was written in pencil, the ink faint where Mason had likely rubbed the page. At the hotel's front desk a clerk pressed his lips together when I gave the name. I watched him check the log and push a key across to me with a practiced small gesture. "Room 602 was vacated this morning," he said. Left in a hurry, the clerk's hands were clean and certain. No one saw him check out. His statement opened a wedge between facts and motives. That afternoon I arranged to meet Mason at the cafe 2 blocks from our apartment. I chose a table by the window where I could watch him enter. I ordered tea and folded the recorder into my coat pocket. When Mason came in, he pushed back the door with his shoulder and scanned the room. He looked older somehow, the stubble thicker, the scar near his eyebrow catching the light. He sat opposite me with that measured, low voice of his that usually softened my edges. "Mason," I said, "why did you leave a note and not say anything?" He folded his hands. "Ava, I didn't want to drag you into it. I thought I could handle it alone." He avoided my eyes. His hand went to his jaw and rubbed along the stubble. The action made him look younger and uncertain. "Mason," I said, and I let the name stand alone so he would answer it. "When you said we'd be together, what did you mean?" He paused. "I meant I choose you. I always choose you." His answer sounded familiar but hollow. He looked down at the bruise forming at the edge of his cheek and then back at me. "There's someone making threats. I thought if I said too much, they'd go after you. I lied because I didn't know how to keep you safe and keep you in my life at the same time." His voice tightened and the room felt suddenly small around us. "We argued with short, sharp lines, Mason. You left without telling me," I said. "Ava, I told you I needed time," he said. "Mason, time isn't a sentence you can hand me while you walk out the door." I pushed my cup aside. No, the words were promises, not placeholders. "Ava." He reached for my hand and then stopped. The hesitation was louder than his words. "Why are you protecting me by lying to me?" I asked. "Who threatened you?" My questions came in a string. Each pulled at him. He finally blinked and said, "I thought it was someone from work. Maybe an old client. But I didn't want you to look into it, Ava. I thought if you knew, you'd stay away and be safe." At that moment a woman passed the window and glanced in. Mason tracked her with his eyes. His hand moved to the keychain in his pocket as if counting its keys. He didn't meet me again. The movement created a small cliffhanger in the cafe. Was he protecting me or hiding an affair? When I left the cafe, the city noise folded around me and I carried the recorder in my pocket like a small, heavy thing. I called Lena and asked her to meet me at the stair landing. We flipped through Mason's things and found the hotel ticket and the photograph with the thumbtack again. Lena held the photograph and read the names on the back. "Ava, there's a second name here." A woman's name. Her voice didn't rise. She only said it plainly. Isabella. Her quiet made the possibility of betrayal real in a way the recorder had not. I confronted Mason with the notebook, the hotel stub, and the name. He narrowed his eyes and then, slowly, told a different half of the truth. Isabella is someone I met because I was trying to draw attention away from you. She isn't what you think. I asked her to meet me so someone would see me with someone else, not you. Mason. Who does that? I asked. Someone who didn't know how else to hide you. He looked at me with a steadier expression, as if the explanation itself would repair the break. The explanations multiplied like paper after a rain. No called that evening and admitted he had found the anonymous printed threat slipped under Mason's locker by a courier. No's voice was low when he told me someone would regret staying close to him. He looked at it for a while and then hid it in his locker. He didn't tell us where he'd been. He'd deal with it. No paused. "Ava, I think he was scared." That single admission pushed me from anger into a concrete fear. The next day I followed the last receipt on the hotel stub. It led to a riverside warehouse where Mason had been meeting someone in the freight office. I waited 10 minutes behind a stack of pallets and then saw the figure step out of the shadows. I recognized the way the person moved. It wasn't Mason, it was someone who had been watching him. I stepped forward. Mason was already there, hands raised in a placating gesture. "Mason, who is following you?" I demanded. He didn't answer at first, his jaw tightened. Then he said, "Ava, I did something years ago. I owed someone, they found me again. I thought I could keep it from you." His voice dropped to a near whisper. The warehouse smelled of oil and river water. The physical presence of the freight crates made the conversation feel like a negotiation over tangible objects rather than feelings. Then the shadowed figure moved closer and the air snapped. The figure said, "Mason, you promised you'd pay." The voice was not disguised. The person had a stance that suggested they were used to being obeyed. Mason's hands dropped to his sides. He looked at me with a worn expression, and then tried to step between me and the follower as if his body could serve as a shield. Words came fast. "Mason, tell me now," I said. "I made a choice to take care of things alone. I kept you on the side of my life that I could control. I'm sorry." His apology came with a small, precise sound. There were 3 quick lines back and forth after that. "Mason, you left a note." "Why?" I said. "You ran from me." I asked, "Mason, are you trading our promises for safety?" "No, Mason, I faked certainty because I thought I could manage the danger. I didn't want to drag you into the mess." The follower's presence made the air feel tight. He didn't look at me. He only watched Mason. The follower stepped closer and shoved Mason. Mason's hand found the recorder that had been in his jacket. He flicked it on and spoke, matching the line I had heard earlier to the new, raw moment. "Don't come near her." The follower laughed and the sound clanged off metal. I moved without thinking and shoved a crate between us. My body answered with a flare of protection I didn't expect. The follower looked at me then and said, "So you are the woman." His eyes went to my hand where the simple gold band sat. He spat the word, "You don't know him." The line was meant to wound. I stepped toward Mason and he didn't pull away. We ran when the follower reached for Mason's arm and then for me. We crashed out of the warehouse and into the cool river air. Mason's jacket was torn at the sleeve and a smear of dark ink lined the cuff. The chase ended with a car screech and the follower disappearing into the night. We were left on a cracked sidewalk, and Mason leaned his forehead against the cold brick wall and breathed like someone who had been holding his breath for too long. After we escaped, we sat on the stoop and I opened his worn brown notebook. He kept lists there. Groceries, client names, and one line I hadn't understood before: "Keep her safe at all costs." The sentence had been innocuous until now. I read it aloud and Mason closed his eyes. I thought I could keep that promise without telling you how. The notebook gave me a different angle on his earlier words and pushed my suspicion toward a clearer understanding. His evasions had been protective but also controlling. We returned to the apartment before dawn, exhausted and raw. Lena had left a pack of coffee on the counter and a note that read, "Call me if you need me." I called Lena. She came over and sat at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a mug. No texted that he'd check security footage at the office for any faces that might match the follower's gait. The 2 of them anchored the next moves. Their choices moved the story forward. They were no longer background names. At dawn, with the sky pale through the blinds, Mason and I stood on the balcony. He handed me his notebook and pointed to a single line he'd written the night he left. "Tell her later. Keep her safe." I said the words slowly. "Mason, you made a promise to me and another promise to yourself." I met his eyes and did not look away. The raw bruise on his cheek had a new tenderness to it. It was the proof of consequence. I asked him to explain exactly who had followed him. He hesitated and then admitted a name I recognized from a business dispute years earlier. The person had resurfaced when Mason failed to repay an obligation. "I didn't tell you because I wanted to protect you from what that man does, Mason." I was wrong. We argued again in short lines. "Mason, you hid the truth from me," I said. "I thought I could fix it without pulling you in," he replied. "Mason, I would rather be with you through the fix than pretend the promise was enough." The argument ended not in a declaration, but with both of us exhausted and breathing. When the sun rose, I made a decision without grand speeches. I opened Mason's notebook to the single unresolved line and wrote one more sentence beneath it. "We define what forever means together using words and plans, not placeholders." I did not read it aloud. I folded the page and slid it back into the book. The notebook was tangible. It contained actions as much as intentions. Lena called from the stairwell that morning. "Ava, the security footage at our building shows a man leaving in a hurry the night Mason left. He got into a car registered to a company that Mason used to consult for. Lena's discovery changed the direction for us." No sent a photo through his phone. A face caught on a grainy camera at the warehouse. We compared the images to a name Mason finally gave us. The pieces fell into place in a way that clarified motive. We did not end the chapter with a resolution of the longer threat. Instead, I made a smaller, immediate choice. I told Mason, we will go to the police together, or we will find a private way to force him to stop. But I'm done being kept in the dark. My voice was flat and certain. Mason reached for my hand, and his fingers closed around mine with a pressure that matched his measured warmth. The chapter closes with a concrete, physical beat. I sat on the balcony at dawn with Mason's worn brown notebook open across my knees. The page with the line he'd left unfinished looked up at me. I folded the page over, slid it into my pocket, and walked back inside to call No and Lena. The decision to act together was no romantic flourish. It was a practical step. I set the notebook down on the kitchen table and went to the door to answer a knock. The knock at the door ended the chapter and created the clear next move. Someone else had arrived while I had tightened up the facts. I stood with my hand on the knob, ready to see who would change what we had only begun to understand. I reached the rooftop and stopped hard when I saw Mason standing near the string lights, laughing with a woman I didn't recognize. The laugh landed in my chest like a proof I could hold. Suspicion rose in my throat and pushed me forward before I could steady my feet. I moved through the cluster of dunners with my hand tight around the stem of a champagne flute, eyes fixed on the dark jacket he wore, the worn leather I knew from evenings at his place. The problem was immediate and visible. He was not alone, and nothing in his expression read like an accidental conversation. The night smelled of grilled citrus and ozone from the city below. The rooftop chatter kept folding over me like background noise, and not one person seemed able to stop the ache in my bones. Lena saw me before Mason did and her smile disappeared. "Ava," she said, stepping closer so her voice stayed low. Her hand brushed mine when she passed the hors d'oeuvres tray. The gesture felt like a small alarm. "You okay?" she asked. I could hear the strain under her words. I pressed my lips together. "Who is she?" I asked. My sentence was short and to the point. I wanted the name before the explanation. Lena's eyes flicked toward Mason and then away. "Elena," she answered. "She's with the Arts Council." The answer should have settled things. Instead, it made me angrier. My jaw tightened and the suspicion shifted into a hot, immediate edge. I remembered the apartment door ajar a week ago, the missing jacket from the peg, the folded note left on the bed. Those details were not accusations by themselves, but they had a way of gathering meaning when you saw a man you loved laugh across a crowd with someone else. I moved so Mason would see me. I wanted him to look up and explain, to close the distance with a sentence that made sense. Mason saw me then. For half a second he froze and the laugh died at the edge of his mouth. His eyes met mine and he offered that steady smile he used when he wanted to trade a difficult word for calm. "Ava," he said. He sounded measured and careful. His voice was low. It did not reach the people beside him. The smile held as if he could settle me with the curve of his mouth the way he settled arguments with a touch on my shoulder. I walked to the balcony rail and let the city lights blur while I formed the next question. I chose my words so they would be hard to deflect. "Who is she?" "Mason." He moved closer, hand half outstretched like a placating gesture. "She's Alina. We met on the committee. She's helping with the gala. Are you leaving soon?" I asked, naming the deeper fear. The itinerary I had found in his locker the last time Lena and I had looked felt sharp in my pocket like a paper blade. My voice held a demand, not just curiosity. Mason's eyes dropped to my hands. His jaw worked. "I told you, I'm not running from you. I have to be away for a few days." "It's family," the word family like it would resolve everything. Lena shifted beside me and her fingers tightened into a fist behind her back. "Ava, I wish I'd told you sooner," she said. "I didn't know how to." The conversation should have moved toward clarity, but instead it started to circle. Mason's reassurances felt like soft padding against an accusation I couldn't swallow. I forced the next move. I left the railing and followed him to the quieter end of the rooftop, keeping my steps measured so no one could read panic in them. The air between us narrowed. We stepped into the service stairwell, and the fluorescent light hummed above us. Mason leaned against the cinder block wall, hands in his pockets like he always did when he wanted to look casual. His avoidance had a rhythm I recognized. The stairwell made our voices low and close. You were laughing with her like you were, I started. My voice cut off when he reached for my arm. He did not touch me the way he used to. The movement was automatic, meant to calm me more than to connect. Ava, it was a conversation. Mason, we were discussing the donor list. You know I do these things. You didn't tell me you had to leave, I said. The accusation landed with a sharpness I couldn't disguise. I told you I had something to handle, he answered. I didn't want to drag you into it. Anger moved through me then, colder and harder than suspicion had been. I stepped back and let the stairwell's concrete take some of the sound. You left a note on my pillow and a jacket missing from the peg, I said. That looks like running to me. Mason's eyes shifted. He rubbed the stubble on his jaw. I didn't mean to make you worry. I thought the plan was temporary. I thought we'd talk once it was set. We traded lines like that for a minute, short sentences cutting at each other's reasons. The back and forth reached the requirement of sharp exchanges. I asked, he deflected. I named the evidence, he described logistics. The stairwell made our voices abrasive. When I accused him of using nice words to avoid commitment, his face tightened. That's not fair, Mason. I'm trying to protect a solution. Protect from what? I pushed from saying what you mean. From telling me if you'll be here tomorrow. From causing you more trouble if things go sideways. He answered, you don't need that on top of everything. The stairwell felt smaller after that. I could hear a trolley in the distance and the muffled music from the rooftop. I took a breath and asked one more thing. Are you planning to leave tonight? He stared at me. The pause stretched. Not tonight, he said finally, but soon. A silence dropped between us that tasted like a decision. I felt the emotion shift again. Suspicion had flared into anger and now settled into a hard, edged dread. I left the stairwell without shaking his hand goodbye. Lena met me near the staff locker area with a look that had guilt stitched into it. She slid an envelope across the top of a metal locker with fingers that trembled. Her index fingernail had a nick where she'd been nervous. I found this in Mason's locker when I was restocking, she said quietly. I shouldn't have. I opened the envelope and unfolded the printed itinerary. A flight number glared at me in black type. On the back there was a short note in Mason's handwriting. I'm handling it. I'll explain when I can. No emotional words, no time for me. The paper felt thin and exact between my fingers. The itinerary made a plan concrete the way a map can tell you where a road ends. My chest tightened. Why didn't he tell me? I asked Lena. She looked away, me to keep it quiet. It was complicated. My voice when I spoke next was flat. Complicated how? She shrugged and her lips pressed thin. I don't know. I only know he left the jacket and the note, and then avoided talking about it. I was worried. The third external event hit when Daniel arrived at the loading dock. His voice cut through the night harder than the fluorescent bulbs. He stormed past the caterers with his coat half unbuttoned and rain still on his collar from earlier. Daniel's face was the kind that kept tension on display. He didn't hide his anger. Mason, what are you doing? Daniel demanded. His words landed on us like a delivered accusation. Mason turned and his expression shifted into a defensive calm. Daniel, not here, not here. Daniel snapped, you promised you'd handle this without doing what you always do, leaving things vague. Daniel's voice was blunt and immediate. He had the kind of anger that names actions instead of feelings. You keep telling people it'll be there, and then you disappear. You were using soft words and expecting people to fill the rest. Mason's jaw tightened. He spoke in the same controlled voice he'd used with me. It's not that simple, Dan. We don't have time for, you think I'm going to help you tie up another loose end while you keep everyone guessing. Daniel. His words put a public pressure on Mason and forced the private into the open. I watched them argue and felt a new shift inside me. Anger curdled into betrayal. Daniel's lines made a claim I had been forming privately and put it where I could not ignore it. I stepped closer to Mason then and asked him to answer for himself. Mason, tell me what this is, I said. Tell me if you leaving because of them, or because of something you won't say to me." He looked at Daniel, and then at me. The crowd on the rooftop leaned away as if our fight made people want quieter air. Mason's hands found the edge of his jacket, and he folded his fingers around the seam like he could hide the truth there. "I have to go help with something at home, family issues that need my presence," he said. "I didn't want to drag you into the mess, so you leave me a note and plan a flight," I said. My words were clipped. "That counts as not dragging me in." "I thought I'd spare you complications," he said. "You spared yourself the trouble of being clear, Daniel." He put his hands flat on the loading dock rail and leaned forward. "You can't keep doing this." They argued in quick, short beats. Mason practical things. Daniel threw accusations of avoidance back at him, and I kept naming the evidence I had. Our exchange reached a boil. 3 to 6 rapid lines snapped between us, each line short and hard. The crowd had not called security, but a small group of bystanders watched us with the curiosity of people who like the shape of other people's trouble. I felt exposed and furious. I wanted Mason to answer in a way that gave me a clear choice: stay or leave. Instead, he reached into his pocket and produced a thin gold band, the ring I wore on my right hand, and his fingers grazed mine. In the struggle after his attempt to take it back, the ring slipped from my hand and fell to the pavement. The metallic sound was soft, but it landed like a verdict. The ring hit the pavement and spun. Someone gasped. Daniel swore. Mason's face collapsed into worry and then into something like regret. I crouched instinctively to look for it, but my knee hit the concrete and my pulse thudded in my ears. The ring rolled under a parked service van and disappeared into shadow. I felt the loss the way you feel a tooth fall, sudden emptiness and a sharp awareness of what was gone. The rooftop drained some color. The music up top sounded muffled and small. People edged away. Mason reached down to help me and I pulled my hand back. He tried to say a single thing that would fix it, Ava. "Don't," I told him. My voice was low and anchored. The crowd heard it, and then a silence hovered over the loading dock like a held breath. I left without answering Daniel when he called my name. I needed a place where the city noise could not flatten me. I found the late tram and rode toward home with my palms pressed against each other. My hands smelled faintly of lemon from the hors d'oeuvres. The tram's fluorescent lights made everything practical and small. I replayed the stairwell conversation and Mason's evasive phrases like something on a loop. The emotion in me shifted again. Betrayal cooled into a hard, quiet numbness. My breathing settled. A woman across from me rubbed her temple and closed her eyes. Children bounced in the back seats where the tram's suspension made tiny noises. The ride lengthened the space for thought and also refused me the drama of confrontation. I tried to sort the facts. A missing jacket, a folded note in my apartment, a flight itinerary from his locker, public laughter with Alina, Daniel's accusation about avoidance, and now a lost ring. Each item was concrete. Each item wanted an answer I did not have. When I opened my apartment door, the lock clicked louder than usual. I remembered the night the door had been open a crack and how I had pushed it with my shoulder and walked in. That memory was no metaphor. It was a concrete evening where I found evidence of his leaving. I set my bag on the table and felt the weight of the envelope Lina had given me in my jacket pocket. The ring knot on my finger felt like a gap shaped like a circle. I went into the kitchen and poured water into a glass. The water sounded like a measured thing in the quiet. As I set the glass down, I noticed a small folded paper under the door. It had been slid under with the precise motion of someone who knew my hours. I picked it up and the crease felt practiced. My hands did not tremble when I unfolded it, but the air in my chest did. The note was brief and clipped. It listed flight times and a plan for who would pick up my mail. It offered no explanation beyond the logistics. There were no apologies, no promises. The paper used even, efficient handwriting. The content supplied facts and avoided feelings. My eyes moved from line to line as if scanning a timetable. The note's tone made a decision visible. Mason had arranged the practical without asking me to be part of the choice. I read the lines again. I wanted a single sentence that named what he felt for me, but the page only handed me plans. I folded the paper back along its crease and slid it into my worn brown leather notebook, where I kept odd things. The notebook's leather smelled faintly of cedar and old paper, which used to make me feel like a shared possession. Tonight the smell felt like evidence. I set the notebook on the windowsill and sat down at the small table. For a long time I did not move. My thoughts were not poetic, they were practical and deliberate. I made a list in my head of what I could ask him to do and what I could refuse. I considered calling him, going to the airport, confronting Daniel at his office, or simply waiting. Each option required different work and different exposure. The part of me that wanted a tidy answer wanted to call him and demand clarity. The part that protected itself wanted to let the plan go and keep my life steady. A sound at the door made me stand. It was the small creak of the hallway floorboards when someone shifts their weight. I walked to the door and peered through the peephole. The corridor was empty. The stairwell light hummed again. I felt the chapter of the night close around me like a lid that does not open easily. I could choose to chase him across an airport terminal, or I could fold the note into the notebook and wait for him to define himself. Either choice would change what came next. I sat back down and opened the notebook. I wrote a single line in my own hand under the folded paper. "Tell me what you mean." Then I placed the notebook on top of my jacket where I could see it when I left. The action felt like bringing a question into the open, leaving it as a physical object. Outside, a tram bell sounded as it rounded a corner. Inside, the radiator clicked and the apartment smelled faintly of lavender and lemon. I did not make a dramatic speech about rebuilding myself. I did not promise to fight. I did not choose for him. I closed the window and turned off the kitchen light. When I slid the folded note back under the leather cover of the notebook, I felt the chapter tilt toward a single decision: to respond or to walk away. The last sound of the night was the thud of the envelope I had left on the table as I slid the notebook into my bag. I took the notebook and the itinerary with me to bed, not because I had decided, but because I could not sleep without knowing where the paper would be. I put the lamp on low and lay on my back with my hands flat over the thin gold band's absence. My phone buzzed once with a message from an unknown number, and then nothing. The night held no easy answers. When I turned out the light, I knew I would have to make a choice in the morning that matched the facts on the page, not the soft words I had been told. The note under my door had given me a plan and refused an explanation. That refusal became the concrete point I could use. I put the notebook on the bedside table and let the dark be practical and quiet. A decision had not been made, but the question was now an object in my hand. I folded my hands over my chest and listened to the radiator click a measured rhythm. The night ended with a single, resolute fact. The note waited where I could choose to answer it or to leave it alone. I slipped into the narrow alley behind the community theater and stopped with my hand on the brick. Mason's back was to me. He held a small brass key between his thumb and forefinger and pressed it into a woman's palm. The physical sting of suspicion hit me like cold rain on my neck. I couldn't breathe around it. Suspicion pushed my feet forward before my mouth could form a question. I moved closer so the street lamp pooled light over their hands. The woman folded the key into her coat like a secret and turned away. I cut across the puddled pavement and stepped onto the theater's back steps. "Mason," I said, voice even but sharp. Mason started, then turned slowly, his green eyes narrowing. My chest tightened into a decision. I would not let this be another soft excuse. I have not been quiet about who I am or what I expect. I live 2 blocks from the theater. Lily knows the exact route I take home. My brown leather notebook stays under my pillow. That morning the apartment door was open a crack when I pushed it with my shoulder, and that detail still felt raw. I thought of that open door and of Mason laughing under rooftop lights with a woman I did not know. Those earlier moments were evidence I had to handle now. "Mason, why are you giving a key to Evelyn?" I asked. I used her name to pull him into the facts. He forced a smile and ran his hand along his jaw, the habit that used to calm him. He didn't answer my question at once. Instead he said, Ava, it's not what you think. That line was familiar. I had heard variants before. Suspicion hardened into frustration and then into a sharp, practical anger. Evelyn stepped back onto the sidewalk and looked at me with quick eyes. Ava, please, she began. I cut her off. Evelyn, who asked you to take this? My words landed like small stones. She swallowed and said, Mason, he'd help our boy with school fees. Her voice barely rose, but it carried a load I did not expect. That statement shifted my anger toward a new direction. Confusion. I kept my hands visible. My fingers brushed the thin gold band on my right hand. Mason watched the movement and his control tightened. Mason, I said again, is that true? Did you promise money? Did you promise anything to her that you did not promise to me? He looked at Evelyn, then back at me, and for the first time his measured voice wavered. I promised to try, he said. I promised we'd figure it out. His phrasing, vague, cushioning, was a pattern I recognized too well. Evelyn folded her coat tighter. He'd be there. Ava. He me not to worry. She named Mason directly, and the way she did it removed any reasonable doubt that this was about a promise made. I heard the word promise and felt its weight. I had been living inside promises that never had definitions, and now I confronted their consequences for someone else. I pressed for detail. When did he say this? Where? Evelyn had been at the benefit on the rooftop. My mind snapped back to that night. String lights, Mason laughing with a woman who wasn't me, a glass of white wine slipped from my fingers. I asked, did he say where he'd help? Did he give you a time, a place? Evelyn's answers were small, specific. A name of a clinic, a phone number scrawled on a napkin. The specificity made the story concrete. It wasn't a rumor floating in the dark. Mason moved closer and put both hands in his pockets. I arranged something. I didn't want to make a scene at the benefit. He looked at me as if I should understand a kindness hidden behind secrecy. The way he avoided eye contact under pressure pushed my anger into a new shape. Betrayal. Not just that he had been absent, but that he had chosen words that served him and left others to assemble their own meaning. I followed him to the parking lot. The lamps made his watch glint. Mason, this is the third time you've left answers vague. I said, you forever once. We decide things together. When I find notes and receipts and empty explanations, I can't tell what you meant. He folded his arms and said, Ava. I'm trying to protect you and them at the same time. His voice carried the old protective cadence. It also carried distance. He slid a folded note into my hand when I reached him. My fingers closed around the paper. I did not open it in the lot. I walked toward the diner instead. No, a colleague of Mason's sat in a corner booth and lifted his head when I entered. He had a coffee stain on his sleeve and the nervous energy of someone who had been waiting. No pushed an envelope across the table. Mason, me to bring this to you, he said. No's voice was flatter than usual. He met my eyes and did not smile. You'd read it. I opened the envelope and found a hotel receipt taped to a small notebook. The notebook's cover smelled faintly of tobacco and cedar. I ran my thumb along the spine and found handwritten place names and dates inside. No, where did you get this? I asked. He looked away before he answered. You need to ask Mason. No. The sentence turned the conversation into a direction. He pushed his chair back. Mason, me to hand it to you and leave. His movement was deliberate. He would not stay for confrontation. No had offered the evidence and then disappeared from the center of the conflict. Back at Lily's apartment, Lily spread the notebook and the hotel receipt across her tiny kitchen table. The apartment smelled of instant coffee and detergent. Lily tapped the page with 2 fingers and said, Look here, Ava. Her voice was precise. She had become part investigator because she had to be. The page had a heading. Promises. Under it was a list of names, locations, and short notes, entries that suggested Mason tracked multiple commitments, rather than keeping a single, shared plan. I read aloud a line under promises. Evelyn, clinic, covered tuition, paid later. The question mark bothered me more than the line itself. Paid later. I said, What does paid later mean? Lily shrugged. It looks like he framed some things as contingent. He labeled kindness as optional. The notebook turned the idea of ambiguity into a choice. Mason had decided where to make firm commitments and where to leave softness. We worked through pages until my hands trembled a little. Each page added a date, a room number, a phrase. The more I read, the less I could call his absences accidents. Anger, which had been raw and physical in the alley, moved into cold clarity. I checked my phone and found a message from the rooftop night. A photo of Mason laughing with his arm around a woman, and a caption that had once comforted me now read like proof. I left Lily's with the notebook tucked under my jacket. Dawn scraped pale light along the horizon. I went to Mason's old balcony, where the rain had left the railing slick. I wanted him to see the facts laid out. I wanted a concrete answer and not another phrase that could be folded differently in his mouth. The balcony door clicked behind me when I entered. Mason stood by the railing with his back to me. He looked smaller in the morning light. "Ava," he said, without turning. My voice tightened. "Why did you write paid later next to their names?" He turned on the word paid and the question like it was a slow fuse. "Because timing matters," he said. "Because I can't promise everything at once." His reply was measured. An attempt at logic rather than a confession. I stepped in front of him and placed the notebook on the metal table. "Is that a plan or is it a choice?" I asked. He met my gaze and his jaw moved. "Ava, it's a plan that takes steps. I can't show you everything because it would ruin the work." He used the word work as a shield. I felt something cold and deliberate under his calm. I let my fingers find the thin gold band on my right hand again and pulled it off. My hand did not shake as much as I expected. I set the ring on the table next to the notebook. "This is one of the things I need you to define," I said. "Is our promise a step or a guarantee? Is it written down or carried loosely?" The ring sat between us like evidence. Mason reached for the ring but stopped. He looked at the ring, then at the notebook, then away. "Ava, please, don't make this about a ring," he said. His words came too quickly and I heard the old habit of deflection in them. My doubt hardened into betrayal. He had known I needed clarity and had given me gentle words instead. For a moment Mason's expression changed, then hardened. "You always make this a test," he said. "You always expect definitions. I can't live under a contract. I told you I'd choose you in ways that matter. I never promised you a script." His sentence was an admission and a refusal at once. The air between us snapped with action. He reached into his pocket and pushed a folded note across the table. I opened the note. It read in Mason's handwriting, a list of dates and single words. "Travel, clinic, deposit, later." Below it a line said, "For now, trust." The phrasing felt like a withdrawal. I stood up so fast the chair scraped metal. "Trust," I said. "Trust is not a schedule you deliver on when it's convenient." My voice was shorter than I wanted. Mason took a breath and then spoke with a softness that used to calm me. "Ava, I love you. I always have." He, my name, and it carried weight. I had to show him what I felt with action, then define it. I said, "Say the words. Decide who gets what and when. Stop leaving people to guess." He looked away and ran his hand along his jaw. He avoided the definition like it might break him. I pushed for specifics. "Evelyn, tuition, who will pay it now?" I asked. He hesitated and then admitted, "I arranged temporary help. I planned a donation, not ongoing support." He did not say that he had watched people assemble hope around a promise. He framed his restraint as prudence. I heard the word and felt betrayed again. At that point I heard a sound below the balcony. A car door closing, a footstep on wet pavement. I turned my head and saw a figure move into the dim of the theater courtyard. My pulse jumped. The external event arrived. Someone else was paying attention. The figure stepped closer. It was No. No climbed the stairs and pushed the balcony door open. He looked at both of us and his face did not soften. "Ava, you need to see page 25, he said. He walked to the table without asking and flipped the notebook open. The movement was precise. He had decided to be a participant. Mason wrote the word promises and then wrote conditions next to them. He plans ambiguity sometimes on purpose. No's voice was plain and direct. Mason's mouth opened, then closed. "Noah," he started. No did not flinch. "Mason, me, to give the envelope to Ava." "No, I didn't read every page. But I saw this list and I thought you should see it now. Noah's willingness to step into the scene changed the power balance. He had been Mason's colleague. Now he offered testimony. Lily appeared at the balcony door after Noah. She had a thermos in her hand and a look that measured how fast events had turned Ava. Lily, I found a receipt in his jacket this morning that matches your hotel line. It's dated the same day he promised Evelyn help. Her voice was steady. The arrival of Lily and the matched receipt was another external event that tightened the timeline. Everything I had suspected collapsed into a clearer shape. Mason's omissions were not accidental. He had written contingency into people's lives. I felt the emotion shift again, from betrayal into a hard, practical clarity. Betrayal demanded a decision. Clarity offered the terms for it. I asked Mason directly, did you plan ambiguity as a tactic? Did you plan for people to rely on phrases without guarantees? He looked at Noah, then at Lily, then at me. Ava, he said, I did not intend to hurt anyone. I thought arranging things quietly would protect them. His voice tried to hold both apology and defense. I slammed a hand on the table so the notebook slid toward him. Then tell them, I said. Tell Evelyn what you will do and when. Tell Noah and Lily the difference between "I'll try" and "I will." I pointed at the page that listed promises. His fingers twitched. He opened his mouth twice and closed it. Finally he said, I can't promise everything now. I can promise specific actions. Pay the clinic bill this week, call the school this afternoon, transfer funds for next month's tuition. The list was practical. It was the language I needed. I felt the decision move inside me. I listened as he named the specific acts. Each item he promised sounded like an attempt to make his vagueness concrete. But then he added, quietly, I won't sign away my life to a calendar. The phrase cut a line between us. It was an insistence on privacy over partnership. I stood up and said, Mason, then we define this here. Not vague, not later. Is this our arrangement? Or am I supposed to live with questions? He swallowed, then answered with a cold, decisive tone I had not heard before ever. I can't give you what you're asking. I never agreed to that kind of contract. His voice had the finality of a closed door. The balcony fell quiet except for the distant hum of early traffic. My hands felt raw where I'd gripped the table. I took the ring and brass key from the table and placed them together in a small paper envelope. I'm leaving this at the Theta Key locker by the elm, I said. My sentence was not a flourish. It was a decision to remove myself from an arrangement where promises were optional. Mason reached for the envelope and then stopped. Ava, he said, please don't walk away over phrasing. His voice tried to reach me. I folded the envelope and tucked it into my coat pocket. I walked down the stairs, each step deliberate. Noah and Lily watched without stepping forward. The Theta Key locker was cold metal with a small slot and a lever that clicked when you closed it. I opened the locker and set the envelope inside. My fingers left the brass key resting on top of the ring. A silhouette stood beneath the elm, distant and still, but I did not stop to look closely. The silhouette was not the point. I pushed the locker door closed and felt the small, definite click. At dawn I walked away with my leather notebook under my arm and the city beginning to stretch awake. My decision was concrete. I would no longer accept a life arranged by vague assurances. I had demanded specifics and received them in pieces, but Mason's refusal to commit fully had chosen a shape for our future. I returned to my kitchen table, sat down and wrote a single page in my worn notebook. I listed the things I would no longer accept with dates and times where applicable. I wrote the word promises at the top, and then drew lines beneath it. The lines were not poetic, they were a checklist. I did not narrate an inner transformation. I set the notebook aside and made coffee, listening to the kettle boil. Later that day, Mason called and left a message that named 3 concrete actions he had scheduled. A transfer for the clinic, a call to the school, an appointment with a counselor to discuss how to coordinate support. He used specific times. Hearing the voicemail, I felt the last shift from confusion into resolution. I did not answer right away. Instead, I packed the small paper envelope with the ring and the brass key into a drawer and closed it. I moved things so the apartment matched the boundary I had set. The day contained ordinary actions, washing a mug, folding a sweater, but each action carried the weight of choice. At dusk, I walked past the theater. The locker was closed. The silhouette I had seen at dawn was not visible now. I kept walking and let the streetlights make gold islands on the pavement. My notebook lay on the seat beside me. I touched its worn spine and felt steadier than I had at the alley. I had confronted a choice. Accept soft promises or require clarity. I chose clarity. The chapter closed on a concrete beat, the locker's click, and a new set of facts to build upon. I did not tidy every consequence. I left room for the next step to be acted out, not imagined. That evening I wrote one line at the bottom of the page. Bring receipts, set dates, name the promises. Then I closed the notebook and turned off the lamp. A silhouette watched from the dark as I walked away, but I did not look back. The locker had clicked. The ring and the key were where they needed to be. I had defined a boundary with a practical action, not a speech, and that choice changed the direction of what came next. I pushed the workshop door open with my shoulder and stopped because Mason's hand was passing a small wrapped parcel into a woman's lap. Suspicion hit like a fist in my chest. I stepped further inside without thinking. "Mason," I said, breathing fast enough to hear. The woman looked up, the parcel tight in her hands. I saw the brass key in Mason's palm as it caught the light, the same shape I'd imagined in my head since the alley behind the community theater. Suspicion drove my feet forward. I did not wait to ask polite questions. The workbench smelled of cut wood and machine oil. Mason's jacket was folded over a stool where he always left it, but his watch was gone. I grabbed the edge of the bench and felt the roughness through my fingers. "What is that?" I asked. My voice wanted to say something calmer. It did not. He froze, then tried to smile. "Ava, I can explain." The woman folded the parcel into her bag and pushed to stand. "I'm Emma," she said quickly, holding out her hand the way people do when they want to call a conversation harmless. She pressed the parcel closed with both palms like a shield. I remembered the apartment door cracked open that night. My palm still ached from pushing against it. I remembered the rooftop ladder like a proof I had held, the key pressed into a woman's hand in the alley. Those were facts, not atmosphere. They lined up in my head like a row of evidence. "You can explain now," I said. I kept the word suspicion in my mouth, if it were something I could hand back to him, because it had been the first clear thing I had felt the morning I found his note and his jacket missing. He looked at Emma and then at me. "Ava, that's not." Mason started, and his voice pulled the room toward reason. Not what it looked like. He set both hands on the bench as if steadying himself was necessary to steady his words. Lewis turned from the doorway where he'd been leaning with a cup of clay. "We're coffee," watching the scene harden. "You okay, Ava?" "Lewis." His voice was measured. He had the kind of protective impatience that had gotten him into other people's arguments before. "Emma." He me to wait. He'd bring this after the meeting. Her hands tightened on the paper. I thought. She stopped and looked at Mason. I thought he meant he couldn't talk about it yet. Her mouth made a small, apologetic shape. That was the other explanation I had kept in a pocket. Maybe everything had a private reason. But the key under the elm had been an image I couldn't forget. Lewis stepped forward and used his phone to shield his face from the sun. "Ava, you should see this. I saw messages last week." He handed me the phone like evidence. Mason's thumb hovered near his mouth. "It's not just a thing, Ava." He promised one set of words and made other plans. Louis Mason's name slowly, as if testing how the air would answer. The workshop suddenly felt too small for the three of us. Machines hummed, a belt ticked, Mason's hands twitched. He rubbed the back of his neck in that motion he'd done since we were 21, and he still couldn't name his future out loud. I felt the first shift in my chest. Suspicion curdled into something sharper, anger. "Why didn't you tell me?" I said, and the words came out thin and immediate. I spoke like I could pull the truth into the light by demanding it. Mason's eyes flicked away. "Because I didn't want to hurt you with plans that might change," he had quiet, the kind of sentence meant to contain the blow. "Because I didn't know how to tell you I needed time to sort it out." His palms spread on the bench. His voice tried to stay low and steady. I didn't think you needed to worry about the small things yet. Emma's lips pressed together. He me the same thing. He me his promises were soft, temporary. She looked at Mason, then at me. He me to trust him for a while. The way she said trust made it sound like a small domestic item left on a counter, not the kind of omission that rearranges a life. I thought of the folded note from chapter 1, the apartment door open a crack, the rooftop laugh I had seen. I counted each omission in my head to see if they added up to a plan. They did. I moved to open the drawer in Mason's workbench without meaning to, fingers trained by habit. My hand brushed a folded paper I hadn't seen earlier. The texture was different. My stomach dropped. Claire arrived from the gallery with a flustered air and a paper folder clutched under her arm. She didn't wait for an invitation. "I think you should see this," she said, and the Mylar folder hit the bench like a small command. She pushed the papers out of the folder, a 1-year consultancy contract with dates and a pardif of a lease in another city. The lease had Mason's name and an address I didn't know. "I found this in the shared drive, Claire. I thought you should know." My heart did a strange, physical skip and then found a rhythm of its own. Doubt to anger to a slow, cold clarity. I read the months listed. The dates lined up with meetings he'd said were nights I couldn't come. The consultancies, the forwarding address, concrete things, not private pauses or soft talks. They were plans. Mason's face folded. He tried to reach for the papers as if he could pull them back into anonymity. "Ava, I wasn't keeping this from you to hurt you." He sounded small in a room full of sawdust. "I thought I was protecting you. I thought I was protecting us." His eyes met mine and then slid off like a bird that couldn't land. Louis dropped his phone on the bench and tapped at a message thread. "Look." He scrolled and let Mason's texts flash across the screen. Gentle, conciliatory messages to me paired with clinical, decisive planning messages to others. In one thread Mason wrote, "We'll shift operations next month." And in another he wrote, "Tell her later." Keep it calm. The two tones struck like evidence that intention had been split. I heard my own voice say, "So which is true?" The question was short. Mason opened his mouth, closed it, ran a hand along his jaw. He had always had a measured way of moving when he was nervous. Now his measuredness read like avoidance. Claire pushed the lease across the table so I had to touch it. The paper was warm from being held. "This shows dates," she said. "This shows plans." She tapped the lease where the address was typed. "Do you want me to read the whole thing out loud?" Her voice was steady. Claire had always been practical like that. See Rid State. She had worked with Mason on a past installation, and she knew how he wrote proposals. He didn't tell you. He wrote it down anyway. I felt the second major shift. Anger blinking into a different kind of hurt, humiliation. Not just that he had planned, but that he had kept those plans where I could not see them. "You me forever, and you never defined it," I said. The sentence landed like an accusation, and then felt like a confession. "You promised a direction. Mason, you never drew the map." My hands were shaking in a way that made the coffee cup on the bench rattle. Mason's voice broke in a quiet, controlled way. "I pictured things. I pictured us. I wrote them down in pieces I couldn't share because I thought I'd be a burden if I asked you to wait while I fixed it." He swallowed. "I didn't want to put you through decisions I wasn't sure of." He kept calling them decisions instead of plans. Language had been his way of softening weight. Emma looked from Mason to me and back. I thought he meant temporary help. She said again he'd tell me when it needed to be public. She stopped. Her bottom lip trembled. She had come into the studio because Mason had offered her help accessing tools for her own small project. Now she stood in the middle of our argument like an unplanned witness. Louis stepped between us in a way that forced space. He's been telling people 2 different stories. He Mason's name like a fact. "You deserve one explanation." Not 2. He met Mason's eyes and didn't look away. "Mason, you owe Ava clarity." Louis's words were a small public demand that rose above the machine noise. Mason's jaw worked. "I didn't mean to lie." It with the deliberate cadence he'd always used to try to make things less sharp. "I thought omissions were kinder than questions I couldn't answer." The difference between lying and omitting had always hovered under his sentences. I couldn't stay in that room while words fumbled for truth. I walked out into the sun. The sidewalk felt bright but indifferent. Passersby glanced and then turned away. Our argument became private again in public. I dragged Mason outside with me. "We do this now," I said. My voice was precise because the argument needed precision. "Tell me everything. Tell me the lease, the consultancy, the dates." I listed them like a shopping list to be checked off. He inhaled. "I have a consultancy starting in 2 months. It's a 1-year thing." I thought it would give me a chance to scale the shop and then come back. He shop as if that was the simplest noun. "The lease is for a small studio. I thought we'd split time. I thought I could keep both lives alive." He looked at me. And for a moment the man I loved seemed to be measuring the gap between what he wanted and what he had done. Luz's voice cut in short. "Did you tell her? Did you tell Ava?" He pointed at me. "How am I supposed to tell her you told me one thing and wrote another?" He had the impatient cadence of someone who could not bear half-truths. Mason's mouth formed a single long line. "No. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to make you choose before I knew. I thought I could fix it without asking you to wait. I thought I was protecting you from being hurt now." He repeated the same protection line, as if repeating it enough would make it safer. Emma pushed her bag strap off her shoulder and sat at the calf corner table while we argued. Claire stayed on the edge of the group with the papers folded damp from where I'd set my hand on them. Her presence was like a calendar, dates, names, signatures, solid and indisputable. We moved to the corner calf because the argument needed public witnesses to keep us honest. The string lights were already hung for an evening event, and their small bulbs hummed like a memory I couldn't place. Emma sat and folded her hands in her lap. Louis fetched another coffee and slid into the seat across from me. "Read what you want, Ava," he said. "Read it out loud if it helps." He put his phone face up and left the thread open so the messages could be seen. I read the lease aloud because I needed numbers to match sentences. The clause that listed the start date stuck in my throat. As I read, an unexpected twist landed like a small stone hitting glass. Claire pushed another paper across the table. An email thread showing Mason had been negotiating a role that required weekly travel. He had written, "I'll keep Ava from worrying until I have the schedule finalized." That sentence changed the earlier pattern. It wasn't that he couldn't name it. It was that he chose to delay naming it. He had decided we would learn later. My breath tightened. The twist made the pattern clear. Mason had used soft promises as a buffer while he arranged a concrete plan elsewhere. The choice shifted the meaning of his earlier reassurances. Doubt became anger again, but the anger sharpened into resolve. "So you decided for us," I said. "You decided I'd be told after the fact." My voice was small and hard. Mason's eyes filled briefly. "I thought I was sparing you." He took the paper back and smoothed it with his fingers. "Eva, I was trying to make a good thing without dragging you through the messy parts. I didn't think you'd want to come to every negotiation." He looked, briefly, like the man who wanted to be kind but had mismeasured the line between kindness and exclusion. Louis tapped the table. "You Emma one story and Ava another. That's not protection. That's choices behind someone else's back." He Mason's name with a kind of legal clarity. Claire nodded once, a small, firm motion. Emma reached across the table and put her hand on Mason's. I didn't know the full picture either. Her fingers pressed lightly. "He meant to keep this quiet until it was necessary to tell people. He meant it was temporary. I'm sorry, Ava." Her apology landed on the table like a small currency. She had been used unwittingly to the pattern Mason had created. At that moment, Louis slid his phone across to me again and said, "There's more." He a vendor, he'd relocate operations. He them to hold details until the week before. The vendor's message included dates and the name of a shared studio. My head filled with names and addresses. The evidence fit together like a plan rather than a hope. I felt clarity harden into a decision. The third major shift in emotion came from humiliation into agency. I stood up. "Then name it now." I said, "Name what you meant by forever. Name if you want me to wait. Name what you planned with other people. My voice cut through the cafe's low buzz. Mason's hands trembled. He used the practiced pause he always did before answering when he needed to smooth a truth into something neither of us would flinch from. I was planning a year away for the consultancy, he said. I thought the shop could run while I built contacts. I thought I'd return. I thought we'd decide later whether that meant we moved or we kept two places. He breathed as if the words themselves weighed something. I wanted a future where I didn't ask you to make a choice yet. I let out a sound I had not planned, part laugh, part sob. You other people to hold their plans while you kept me in the dark, I said. That's not asking me to wait. That's choosing for me. I spoke Mason's name once more, each syllable like a hinge shifting. He reached across the table toward me. Ava, please, the request was immediate and raw. I love you. I didn't want to lose what we have while I fixed things. I didn't know how to admit I wasn't ready to define forever. His voice used the old cadences that had soothed me into staying during small early fights. I blinked and felt the last of my fury turn into a quiet imperative. I moved my hand to the thin gold band on my right hand and rolled it forward until it slipped off my finger. I held it between my thumb and forefinger, the metal warm from my skin. The ring had been my promise to myself, a small talisman against vagueness. Now it felt like an instrument for decision. We walked back to my apartment together, because the conversation needed the balcony as a frame. The sun was low, gilding the buildings. My chest felt full of small practical tasks. What I would pack, what I would say to neighbors, what I would do if the consultancy required him to leave for months. Everything had a list now. Mason sat on the balcony rail and said, "Tell me what you need, Ava. Tell me how to fix this." He looked like a man suddenly aware of the breadth of the choice he had made for both of us. Claire and Louise left us a coffee each and stood below in the stairwell like steady witnesses. Emma lingered at the door, apologetic and uncertain. The city noise was a thin hum. Mason's hands found mine and held them for a moment, the way he did before anything else became hard, defined forever for me. I said, "Say the specifics you intended or say openly you never meant it as a contract." "Say it plainly." He inhaled and looked out across the city. I pictured coming back after a year. I pictured building a life with both studios. I pictured us deciding together after I had stability. I didn't say it because I thought you wouldn't want to wait. His sentences were the tidy architecture he used when he wanted to make something sensible out of messy pieces. I felt a pause like the held breath before a decision. The emotion shifted inside me from a simmering hurt into calm clarity. I put the ring into my palm and then I let it fall. The gold band slipped through my fingers and hit the balcony floor with a soft metallic click. Mason's hand shot out but did not catch it in time. The sound of the ring on the concrete was sudden and absurdly final. It made no grand noise. It made a practical small sound. I watched the ring roll to a stop near the ledge. Mason crouched and reached for it, fingers trembling. For a single moment he looked at me as if the movement of picking up the ring would change the choice I had just made. Ava, pick it up. Let me. His voice shook. He had that steady smile when he tried to offer comfort. Now his smile was raw, like a bandage pulled too quickly. I shook my head. "No, Mason." My voice was calm and precise. "I won't make a decision after you've already chosen for me. I won't accept soft promises anymore." The sentence was not an indictment. It was a boundary. I felt the clarity settle into something practical. If you want to build something with me, you will tell me the plan before it is done. If you want me to wait, you will name the conditions and the dates. If you can't, then you've chosen not to have me choose with you. I spoke each line like a checklist. He stood and his face changed in a way I had not seen. The practiced reserve cracking into open fear of you re-asking me to pick my name slowly. "I can't promise I won't have doubts. I can't promise I won't travel. But I can promise to tell you everything. I can promise to bring you into the negotiations." He tried to trade one kind of vagueness for another, procedural openness instead of tidy commitments. I watched his fingers as he held himself steady. The third emotional shift, from hurt into agency, settled into a decision. I would not accept the promise of openness alone. Tell me the dates now, I said. Tell me what you need. Tell me what your year looks like. I wanted words that matched the paperwork Claire had handed me. I wanted a map I could read. He opened his mouth and started to speak, naming months and obligations. He offered a list of travel dates and a schedule for the shop to run part-time under a manager he trusted. He promised weekly check-ins, video calls, and a plan to re-evaluate at 6 months with measurable outcomes. Every practical thing he thought would show he had thought of the logistics. I listened and wrote the schedule in my head. The list had numbers and places. It had commitments that could be measured. He spoke for a long time, and with each detail I felt my anger loosen into something like measured acceptance or deliberate refusal. I could count plans. I could not count trust. When he finished, I looked at Louis waiting below and Claire folding her papers into the folder she had brought. Emma's eyes were wet. Mason's palms were flat and open like he was offering me a blueprint. Eva, he asked, is that enough? Can you wait if I keep you part of the plan? His question was small and precise. I closed my hand around the empty space where the ring had been and felt the coolness of air against my skin. I thought of the years I'd imagined with him and the nights I'd let his evasions stand. I thought of the key under the elm and the rooftop laughter and the apartment door left ajar. My answer had to be practical. No, Mason, I said. Not like this. Not after you kept a plan from me. If we are to be a team, decision-making has to be shared before it's done. I said his name as a punctuation. He swallowed. Then what do you want? He asked. I looked at the city bleeding gold into the buildings as the sun leaned toward evening. I felt the last shift. From sharp rejection into a working resolve. I want defined promises, I said. Dates, expectations, roles. If you need a year to build something, ask me to be part of it. Tell me what you will do to make it fair. If you can't, tell me plainly, and I'll step back so you can build without me. I spoke like someone who had drafted a contract in her head. He nodded slowly. The motion was a small negotiation, okay? He said, I'll do that. I'll put everything on paper and we'll sign it together. He looked at me with a hope that felt both earnest and unsteady. We rose from the balcony edge together. He reached out as if to close a loop. I stepped back toward the stairwell where Louise waited and Claire stood with her folder. Emma offered no words. Her face said she carried regret. The choice had shifted power. I had named the conditions where I would agree to stay or to walk. On the stairwell, I found a quiet pocket of evening light. I took my worn leather notebook from my bag and flipped to a blank page. My hand moved, neat and practical. I wrote a list of promises I would keep to myself and others. Clear dates for shared decisions, weekly check-ins, transparency about moves, and a clause that no major plan would be finalized without both our signatures. I wrote the lines like a homeowner writing an emergency exit plan. The act of writing felt like choosing. Louis watched me write and then said quietly, "Good list, Ava." Claire smiled in a way that meant she approved of clarity. Mason stood across from me and folded his hands. He seemed smaller and more exposed without the safety of unspoken plans. I closed the notebook and pressed a single pressed flower between its first pages, tucking the bloom beside the paper. The flower was the thing Claire had given me earlier when she came in with the folder. It was gentle and ordinary. I slid the notebook into my bag, zipped it shut, and felt the small weight of a decision. I put the gold band in the pocket of my jacket where it would not rattle. Before we left the building, Louis put his hand on Mason's shoulder. "Don't make the same choices again," he said. "Tell her. Ask her. Let her decide with you." Mason nodded. I locked the balcony door behind me with a deliberate motion and felt the latch click in place. The sound was an ending and a beginning folded together. I put my hand to the pocket where the ring lay and felt its metal against my palm. I walked down the stairwell with Luz and Claire and Emma, and the city stepped forward to meet us as the evening lights blinked on. At the bottom of the stairs, Mason my name one more time. I looked at him and answered with the most concrete thing I could give. Name the dates. Name the conditions. Tell me before you act. Then I left the building and felt the ring as a small, quiet object against my jacket, not a symbol of a vow I had to guess. I had written a list, asked for clarity, and set a boundary. I had not given him silence to hide behind. I had let the ring fall, and then I put it away. The balcony door clicked shut behind me.